Trump announced that the United States would again block the Strait of Hormuz, and the US-Iran war has escalated once more. To understand why they are fighting again, I think we still need to analyze it from the perspective of financial capital. First, let's look at the real situation in the Strait of Hormuz. The US military is now making a lot of noise, claiming that they have launched a freedom of navigation operation, saying they have escorted so many merchant ships safely through the strait, and that with US assistance, 8.5 million barrels of oil pass through the strait each day. It sounds like everything is under control. But what is the actual situation? According to the latest data from Windward, an Israeli maritime intelligence company that specializes in global ship tracking and sanctions compliance monitoring, their figures show that throughout July, an average of only a few dozen ships passed through each day. On the 11th of July, only 21 vessels were recorded transiting the strait. On the 12th of July, the number was even lower, in the single digits. Keep in mind that under normal conditions, the daily transit volume is 138 vessels. The current volume is only about 10% of normal. Moreover, of the ships that do pass, 65% go to China and 10% to Russia, none of them US allies. So, is this really freedom of navigation being protected? Now, let's look at what flags these transiting ships are flying. The number one flag is Iran's, so the so-called blockade of Iran-related vessels is also a joke. Moreover, ships that do not cooperate with Iran are not being protected by the United States. The latest developments: on the 11th of July, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps attacked an UAE-owned container ship. The vessel caught fire, and the crew was forced to abandon ship. One Indian crew member is still missing. This was the fourth attack on merchant ships since the 6th of July. Let's also look at real-time GPS positioning data provided by Kepler for the past week of ship movements. You can see that over the past week, after Iran announced the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the vast majority of ships transiting the strait used the northern route. That is, the passage closer to the top, which is the lane prescribed by Iran. Very few ships took the southern lane, which is under US escort. It has dropped to single digits, and before entering, they secretly turned off their transponders. They are clearly more afraid of Iran. So the facts are plain. There is no evidence whatsoever that the United States has regained control of the Strait of Hormuz from Iran. After spending enormous costs to fight Iran, it has neither controlled the strait nor restored normal traffic, and it even has to rely on collecting tolls to make up for the costs of war. Moreover, compared with the war a few months ago, the United States hasn't come up with anything new, still bombing, plus an outer blockade. I haven't seen any other tactics, such as a marine landing to seize control of the strait, its shores, nor have I seen them instigating the Kurds to invade from western Iran. So the United States lost last time. Can it win this time? The question is, why keep fighting when it knows it cannot win? In my previous video on the US-Iran war, I already said that this issue must be considered from the perspective of financial capital. If we discuss it from that angle, I personally believe there are two main reasons why the United States continues to fight Iran. The first reason is that the dollar circulation system based on petrodollars is too important to the modern United States. As everyone knows, after the collapse of the Bretton Woods system, the dollar decoupled from gold, yet it still maintained its status as an international reserve currency, thanks to the capital reflux mechanism. The United States can freely print dollars, and those dollars flow to the rest of the world through trade deficits. The US buys Japanese cars, German machinery, Chinese goods, and pays with green paper. Then, after other countries earn those dollars, they use them to buy US Treasury bonds, US stocks, and US real estate. Remember back in 2009 when Chinese people organized groups to buy houses in the US. That was one of the reflux channels. So dollars flow out of the US and then flow back through Wall Street. Once back, Wall Street uses that money to invest, lend, create derivatives, and push up asset prices, making you feel that your US stocks are appreciating. So you want to buy even more, right? The longer this loop operates, the stronger America's ability to suck capital from the rest of the world. But what is the situation now? China, the world's largest trade surplus country, recorded a total trade surplus of over $1 trillion in 2025. And China is no longer buying US treasuries. Not only is the official sector not buying, but all private channels flowing into US financial markets are being tightened. You may have heard that recently some retail trading apps used for buying US stocks were also put under regulatory scrutiny. You have to understand the purpose. It is to block the capital reflux mechanism. So who is buying US treasuries now? All of America's allies, the UK and Japan, are buying in large quantities. But these economies simply cannot support $40 trillion in US debt. As we all know, buying US debt is equivalent to being drained. Look at those US allies in recent years to fill the hole left by China. They have been frantically buying US debt. Their economies are getting worse, and their people's living standards are deteriorating. So now, aside from China, the only ones still capable of allowing the US to keep sucking blood are the Gulf oil monarchies. And Iran's blockage of the Strait of Hormuz effectively blocks the main artery of this reflux mechanism. Only by looking at it from the perspective of financial capital can you realize how vital this strait is to the United States. Look at Trump now saying, I won't charge a 20% toll, but you Gulf states must come and invest in the United States. That is still all about the capital reflux mechanism. The reason the US can run such huge deficits and carry such massive debt, yet still function, normally is precisely this capital reflux mechanism. In any previous empire in history with such large fiscal deficits, it would have collapsed long ago, because their money was tied to real gold and silver, and spending meant getting poorer. But in the US system, deficits, whether trade or fiscal, are actually an advantage, because you pay out paper you printed yourself and get other people's real assets in return. The bigger your deficit, the poorer others become. That is why the US, the more indebted it is, the stronger it becomes. This is the first empire in human history that grows stronger by borrowing more. Therefore, the capital efflux mechanism is extremely important to the American empire. However, the American people do suffer under this reflux mechanism. This is the structural contradiction between the United States and the American empire that emerged after the collapse of Bretton Woods. That is why the MAGA movement arose. These MAGA voters are actually opposed to American imperialism, but they only have revolutionary passion, without a revolutionary leader to give them proper theoretical guidance. As a result, what they show is more blindness and being used by others. The fruits of their revolution cannot be preserved and are always stolen. So I believe this is the first reason for the US to escalate the war again. The Strait of Hormuz is too important to the American empire. The second reason, I think, is that the United States has a bit of path dependence. Think back, from Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan. How many wars has the US fought? How many did it win? Vietnam was definitely a loss. In Iraq, they won the military battle, but lost politically. In Afghanistan, after 20 years, it returned to Taliban hands. Another US loss. By normal imperial logic, losing so many wars should have doomed the empire long ago. But look at the data. After the Vietnam War in the 1970 seconds, not only did the dollar's hegemony not weaken, but through the petrodollar system, it became even stronger than in the Bretton Woods era. The Iraq War cost over $2 trillion, and US national debt rose from $6 trillion to $10 trillion. Yet that did not affect the continued rise of US stocks. The Afghanistan withdrawal was a mess, but global capital still poured into Wall Street. That defies common sense. For a normal country, war consumes national strength. But for the US, war is like recharging. The fundamental reason is still this capital reflux mechanism. War is also a means of capital reflux. Every regional conflict, whether the US wins or loses, creates global uncertainty. When uncertainty comes, European capital, Japanese capital, Eastern capital, and emerging market funds all flee. Where do they flee? To the safest place, the United States. Then Wall Street and the Federal Reserve. After each crisis, just print money, and asset prices naturally recover and even rise higher. So whether it wins or loses, the bill for war is not paid by the American empire. It is paid by investors around the world who bought us debt. That is the underlying logic of the post-Bretton Woods system that has operated for more than 50 years. Winning or losing does not matter. What matters is that there is always war. Perpetual war only when other places are unsafe will capital run to the United States. The 1973 oil crisis is a perfect case. In October 1973, the Fourth Middle East War broke out, and OPEC members imposed an oil embargo on the U.S. oil prices, skyrocketed from $3 a barrel to $12, and the world fell into the worst post-war recession. Many historical scholars now believe that this oil crisis was very likely engineered by the U.S., or at least that the U.S. could have stopped it but did nothing, instead exploiting it, because the crisis affected different countries very differently. Although ordinary Americans suffered from high inflation, the U.S.'s main competitors, Germany and Japan, had almost zero domestic oil production. So with oil prices quadrupling, the damage to Japanese and German manufacturing was far greater than to the US as a result. Japanese and German capitalists moved their money to the United States because the US offered higher returns. That is the real American spirit, not democracy or freedom, which are just external packaging. I have mentioned before a man named John Connally, who was US Treasury Secretary under Nixon. He famously said, "All foreigners want to screw us, so our job is to screw them first." He later personally orchestrated the Nixon shock, which dismantled Bretton Woods and dealt a heavy blow to the global economy. That is the true American spirit. I can suffer, but I make sure you suffer first. I can be rotten, but you have to be even more rotten than me. Use war to create global panic, destroy competitors' competitiveness, and suck panicked capital into Wall Street three birds with one stone. But this time it is different. And the reason is still China, who is the US's biggest competitor today. China without a doubt. But China does not really care about the Strait of Hormuz. Over the past few months, I think everyone has been realizing in hindsight that the real controller of international oil price fluctuations is not the US, not Iran, but China. China has essentially replaced Saudi Arabia as the new oil central bank, stabilizing the global economy. While maintaining normal domestic consumption and industrial production, China reduced its daily crude oil imports by about 4 million barrels, directly absorbing about one-third of the global oil gap. No one expected this before the war, not even myself. I am so optimistic, yet I did not see it coming. There is also a latest piece of data that is very telling. According to estimates by research institutions, in the first half of 2026, China's electric vehicles alone replaced about 1.4 million barrels per Dalton Y of oil consumption, an increase of more than 40% over the same period last year. And this trend, after the Strait of Hormuz blockade, has not slowed down but accelerated, according to the latest environmental monitoring data. After the Strait of Hormuz crisis broke out, China's traffic-related air pollution levels dropped significantly. This data actually shows that the reduction in China's oil imports is not just about drawing down inventories, but more about a real decline in oil consumption. The result of the energy transition. The energy transition is now being accelerated precisely because of this crisis. That is on the civilian side. On the industrial production side, China has not harmed its own manufacturing. Let's look at June data. According to the latest trade figures from China's General Administration of Customs, June exports surged 20.7% year-on-year, the strongest monthly growth since October 2021. Imports rose 36%, the highest in 5 years, and the trade surplus reached $125.6 billion. At the same time, crude oil imports fell 40% year-on-year, hitting a near-decade low. Moreover, look at the structural changes in exports. The fastest degrowing categories are rare earths, integrated circuits, and aluminum products, all high-tech products in global shortage, while traditional labor-intensive goods, such as fertilizers, ceramics, toys, lamps, and footwear, are declining. This means that the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has not affected China's manufacturing upgrading strategy. Investment and exports in areas like AI, automation, new energy batteries, photovoltaics, wind power, and robotics are taking up an ever larger share of China's economic structure, and these industries are not dependent on oil. So, when the United States launched a war against Iran to disrupt global energy supplies, its main competitor was barely hurt, and its capital reflex logic changed. The old mechanism failed, and the situation is completely opposite to the 1973 oil crisis. China has become the only major economy unaffected by this war. As soon as the war started, US Treasuries blew up again. 30-year yields broke above 5% once more, even approaching 5.1%. As for the impact of rising Treasury yields on the US, I won't go into detail here. You can watch my previous videos. So this US-Iran war, with China as a variable, has become different. The American empire cannot benefit from this war. It is continuously bleeding. Therefore, I believe the most likely end to the war is a US compromise. Either it completely gives up on the Strait of Hormuz, or it acknowledges Iran's status and achieves some form of Iran Soai management. I think that might be the best outcome. For Iran to fully surrender and return to the pre-war status quo is impossible. Alright,